The crimson light of the Alien Council chamber dimmed as Jurex, the oldest and most respected elder of the Galactic Confederation, raised his seven-fingered hand for silence. His translucent skin, webbed with age, glowed faintly in the darkness as he addressed the emergency assembly. 400 representatives from across the known universe leaned forward in their seats, their breathing apparatus humming softly. The ancient texts speak of a horror beyond comprehension. Jurex's voice trembled, its universal translator carrying his words to all present. A creature of darkness that once threatened to consume our ancestors' homeworld. We believed it extinct for millennia, yet our scouts have detected its energy signature on a small blue planet in the outer rim. Frank Young shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the only human representative in the vast chamber. At 35, he was relatively new to his position as Earth's ambassador to the Confederation, having been appointed after first contact just 3 years ago. The gravity enhancers in his specially designed chair strained as he adjusted his posture, trying not to draw attention. Jurex continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. The Voidwraith, consumer of stars, devourer of worlds. Our ancestors fled across 17 galaxies to escape its hunger. The records describe a beast that walks between dimensions, feeding on the life force of entire planets. A holographic image appeared above the central platform, a shadowy, multi-limbed creature with glowing eyes and teeth that seemed to curve in impossible directions. Frank squinted at the projection, a strange feeling of recognition stirring in his mind. Our detection arrays have confirmed its energy pattern on Earth, Jurex announced, sending a wave of fearful murmurs through the assembly. We must act decisively. The protocols are clear immediate quarantine and, if necessary, sterilization procedures. Frank's blood ran cold. Sterilization was the Confederation's euphemism for planetary destruction. He rose to his feet, the movement clumsy in the alien chamber designed for bodies unlike his own. Elder Jurex, if I may address the council. Frank's voice sounded small in the vast space. The elder turned all 4 of his eyes toward the human, his expression unreadable to most species present. The representative from Earth has the floor. Frank made his way to the central platform, the image of the supposed world-ending monster still rotating above it. He studied it carefully, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal data pad. After a few quick taps, he held it up, displaying a photo from his family's lake house back in Minnesota. Respected members of the Confederation, Frank began, trying to keep his voice steady, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. He raised his hand toward the holographic monster. That's my backyard animal. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations, untranslatable sounds of disbelief, and the emergency activation of several species' defense mechanisms. Jurex's skin paled to an almost transparent state. Impossible, the elder's voice cut through the chaos. The Voidwraith destroyed 17 worlds before our ancestors developed the technology to flee its hunger. It cannot be a pet, Frank shook his head. Not a pet, Elder, it's a raccoon, a small mammal native to North America on Earth. They're about this big. He held his hands about 2 feet apart. They're nocturnal, have distinctive masks around their eyes, and yes, they have 5-fingered paws that look a bit like hands. They're clever animals that get into trash bins, but they definitely don't consume stars. Jurex approached Frank, his ancient legs trembling with each step. You are certain of this? Completely certain, Frank replied, scrolling through more photos on his data pad. See, this one was taking food from my daughter's hand last summer. We call this specific one bandit because he keeps stealing our garbage. The elder took the data pad with trembling fingers, studying the images with intense focus. But the energy signature, our ancestors' recordings. Another alien, a tall insectoid being named Trizax, who served as the Confederation's chief science officer, stepped forward. If I may, Elder Jurex, our detection arrays were calibrated based on descriptions from texts over 12,000 years old. The margin for error is considerable. Frank nodded. Perhaps your ancestors encountered something similar but different, Or maybe the descriptions changed over time. Jurex seemed to age further before the assembly's eyes. For 50 generations, we have lived in fear of the Voidwraith's return. Our most sacred protocols, our military preparedness, our very civilization structured around vigilance against this threat. The silence in the chamber was profound. Frank felt a weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had just potentially undermined the founding mythology of the most powerful political entity in the known universe. "Elder," Frank said gently, "perhaps this is an opportunity. If what your ancestors feared was not what you thought, maybe other ancient fears could be re-examined as well." Jurex raised himself to his full height, which still only reached Frank's chest. "The representative from Earth will accompany a scientific delegation to verify this claim. If what he says is true, the Confederation owes Earth a debt for exposing our error. If false," his eyes narrowed. "The sterilization protocols remain active." 3 days later, Frank found himself leading a team of 12 alien scientists through the woods near his family's lake house in northern Minnesota. The summer air was thick with humidity, and mosquitoes buzzed around the aliens with curious interest, though they showed no interest in their exotic biochemistries. "These insects are remarkable," commented Krylith, a gelatinous scientist whose containment suit rippled with each movement. "Such simple life forms, yet so aggressive." "They're mostly annoying," Frank replied, swatting one away from his face. "But they're important for the ecosystem. Birds eat them, they pollinate some plants, that sort of thing." Trizax, the insectoid science officer, seemed particularly fascinated by the mosquitoes. "On my world, insects of this size would be apex predators." Frank tried not to think too hard about that statement as he led them deeper into the woods. The property had been in his family for generations, and he knew exactly where to find what they were looking for. "The feeding station is just ahead," Frank explained. "My dad set it up years ago. The raccoons come almost every night." The alien scientists set up their equipment around the small clearing devices Frank couldn't begin to understand, but which apparently measured everything from quantum fluctuations to dimensional resonance. The setting sun painted the sky in oranges and purples, and the first stars began to appear. "The raccoons are nocturnal," Frank explained. "They should show up soon after dark." As night fell completely, the scientists activated their equipment. Soft lights glowed from various devices, but all were apparently designed not to scare away wildlife. Frank set out some food, bread, marshmallows, and a few hot dogs, then gestured for everyone to step back and wait. They didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, the bushes at the edge of the clearing rustled, and a pair of glowing eyes reflected the light from the equipment. Frank heard several of the aliens activate emergency breathing apparatus in their excitement. "Stay calm," Frank whispered. "Don't make any sudden movements." A raccoon emerged from the underbrush, its masked face curious and cautious. It was a large male, probably around 15 pounds, with a distinctive notch in its right ear. Frank recognized him immediately. "That's Bandit," he whispered to the aliens. "He's been coming here for about 3 years now." Bandit approached the food cautiously, his sensitive front paws reaching out to examine the offerings. Behind him, 2 more raccoons emerged from the darkness, a female and a younger male, likely her offspring from the previous year. Trizax was running a handheld scanner over the animals from a distance. "The energy signature matches our records at 89% congruence," the insectoid scientist reported, voice low but clearly excited. "Factoring in evolutionary drift and the imprecision of ancient recording methods, this is statistically significant enough to confirm they are the same species." Jurex, who had insisted on joining the expedition despite his advanced age, stepped forward slowly. The raccoons froze, watching him. "They do not flee," the elder observed. "They're used to people," Frank explained, "and they're curious by nature, plus we have food." The old alien's skin pulsed with emotion. "May I offer it sustenance?" Frank nodded, handing Jurex a marshmallow. "Hold it out flat on your palm." He might take it or he might not. They're wild animals, not pets. With trembling fingers, Jurex extended his hand with the marshmallow. Bandit studied the alien for a long moment, whiskers twitching as he scented the air. Then, with surprising quickness, he darted forward, snatched the treat, and retreated a few steps to eat it. Jurex made a sound that the translator didn't catch, something so primal it bypassed the technology entirely. Frank realized it was laughter, perhaps for the first time in decades. "For 12,000 years, Jurex said softly, we have feared the return of the Voidwraith. Our most sacred texts describe how it would consume the universe if ever found again, and here it sits, eating what did you call this?" "A marshmallow," Frank replied, smiling. "Sugar, gelatin, and air, basically." The elder watched as Bandit finished the treat and approached again, clearly hoping for more. "Our ancestors were not prone to exaggeration or deception. There must be an explanation." Trizax had been reviewing data on a portable console. "I believe I may have a hypothesis, Elder. The raccoon exhibits unusual neural patterns when compared to other Earth mammals. There are indications of what might be considered low-level psychic ability, nothing like sentient species, but significantly above baseline for non-sentient organisms." Frank blinked in surprise. "Psychic raccoons, that's unexpected." "Not psychic in the way you might think," Trizax clarified, "but they have neural structures that might allow them to perceive aspects of reality beyond normal sensory input. This could explain their unusual manual dexterity and problem-solving abilities." Jurex considered this. "And our ancestors, encountering such creatures before developing proper scientific methods, might have misinterpreted natural abilities as supernatural ones," Frank finished. "Especially if they encountered them under stressful circumstances." The younger raccoon had grown bold enough to approach the group directly. It sniffed at a piece of equipment, then tried to pick it up with its dexterous paws. "No, no," Frank said, gently shooing the animal away from what was probably a 1,000,000-credit piece of technology. "Sorry about that, they like shiny things." "Fascinating," said another scientist, a four-armed being named Grelth. "Their cognitive patterns show striking similarity to juvenile members of several sentient species, including Jorians and Vex. Yet they never developed higher consciousness," Frank shrugged. "Evolution takes the path it takes. They're well adapted to their niche." As the night deepened, more raccoons appeared. A total of 7 eventually gathered in the clearing, eating the offered food and investigating the aliens with cautious curiosity. The scientists collected their data, took samples of fur that had naturally shed, and recorded hours of behavior. By dawn, the mood among the delegation had shifted from tense scientific investigation to something approaching a field trip. Even Jurex seemed rejuvenated, sitting on a log and watching the raccoons with childlike wonder. "I must convene an emergency session of the council," the elder announced as they packed up their equipment. "The implications of this discovery extend far beyond these creatures themselves." Frank nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Will you need me to attend?" "Yes," Jurex said firmly. "The human perspective will be essential, but first I wish to understand more about Earth's wildlife. These raccoons have challenged 12,000 years of our history. What other wonders does your planet hold?" 2 weeks later, Frank stood once again before the Galactic Confederation Council, but this time at Jurex's side rather than as a mere representative. The chamber was even more crowded than before, with additional observers permitted for what had been billed as a historic session. "Members of the Confederation," Jurex began, his voice stronger than Frank had ever heard it. "Our expedition to Earth has yielded discoveries that will reshape our understanding not only of our history, but of our place in the cosmos." The holographic display activated, showing multiple images of raccoons in their natural habitat, climbing trees, washing food in streams, raising their young. Alongside these images were ancient texts and illustrations from the Confederation archives. "For 12 millennia, we have feared the return of the Voidwraith," Jurex continued. "Our civilization's greatest endeavors, our military, our science, our very social structure have been influenced by this fear. Today, I must inform you that the Voidwraith, as we understood it, does not exist." The chamber erupted in voices, some outraged, others confused. Jurex raised his hand for silence. What our ancestors encountered was a species of clever mammals native to Earth known as raccoons. Dangerous to our ancestors, perhaps, given their technological limitations at the time, but not the cosmic threat we believed. He gestured to Frank. Representative Young will explain further. Frank stepped forward, nervous but prepared. Respected members of the Confederation, Earth has millions of species of animals, each evolved to fit specific ecological niches. Raccoons are omnivores that have adapted particularly well to living alongside humans. They're intelligent problem solvers with dexterous paws that can manipulate objects with surprising skill. He activated a video showing raccoons opening complex locks, solving puzzles to obtain food, and using tools in rudimentary ways. Your scientists have discovered that raccoons possess neural structures that might allow them to perceive aspects of reality beyond normal sensory inputs, not supernatural abilities, but evolutionary adaptations that help them survive. Trizax stepped forward next. Our analysis suggests that the Confederation's ancestors, who visited Earth approximately 12,000 years ago according to their calendar, encountered these creatures during a resource-gathering mission. With limited understanding of Earth's biology and under stress from hostile conditions, they misinterpreted the raccoon's natural abilities as something far more threatening. The insectoid scientist displayed comparative brain scans. Furthermore, raccoons exhibit rudimentary abilities that might be considered dimensional awareness and ability to perceive spatial relationships in ways that would have seemed impossible to primitive observers. Combined with their habit of appearing suddenly at night, their distinctive eye markings, and their skillful manipulation of objects, it is understandable how they became mythologized over generations. A council member from the Trilarian system rose. Are we to believe our entire history is based on a misunderstanding? That our ancestors fled across 17 galaxies because of small woodland creatures? Jurex's response was measured. We believe our ancestors did face genuine threats, possibly humans themselves, who were developing their first civilizations at that time, or perhaps environmental challenges on Earth. The raccoon became symbolic of these threats, and over generations, the story evolved into the Voidwraith legend. The debate continued for hours. Frank watched as 12,000 years of history was re-examined in real time. Some council members were outraged, others fascinated, a few even amused. But the evidence was irrefutable. The dreaded Voidwraith was nothing more than a clever mammal with unusually dexterous paws. As the session neared its conclusion, Jurex made a final announcement. In light of these discoveries, I propose a fundamental reconsideration of our approach to other species and civilizations. For too long, the Confederation has operated from a position of fear of the unknown, fear of the Voidwraith's return. Today, we have an opportunity to choose a different path. The elder turned to Frank. Earth has given us a great gift, the freedom from an ancient fear. In return, I propose we accelerate Earth's integration into the Confederation with full member status rather than observational status. The proposal was met with mixed reactions, but the majority seemed supportive. Frank felt a surge of pride not just for his role in the discovery, but for what it meant for humanity's future among the stars. 6 months later, Frank stood on the observation deck of the Confederation science vessel Curiosity, watching Earth grow smaller as they departed orbit. Beside him stood Jurex and a team of Earth's top xenobiologists and diplomats. "I still can't believe we're doing this," said Dr. Kira Bakefield, Earth's leading expert on comparative alien biology. A galactic wildlife survey with Earth as a founding partner. Jurex nodded, his age-spotted skin glowing with excitement. The raccoon revelation, as it's now called, has opened our eyes to a fundamental truth that understanding precedes judgment. How many other species across the universe have we misunderstood? How many potential allies have we overlooked due to ancient fears? Frank smiled. And Earth has so many animals that might surprise you. Wait until you see octopuses. They're basically like your Jorian friends, but underwater and with completely different evolutionary origins. I am particularly interested in your platypus, Trizax commented, joining them on the deck. A mammal that lays eggs and has venomous spurs. Fascinating convergent evolution with several species from the Andromeda sector. The mission they were embarking on would last 2 years, a comprehensive survey of Earth's wildlife alongside similar surveys of 50 other inhabited planets. The goal was not just scientific knowledge, but cultural exchange, helping species understand each other through understanding their planetary co-inhabitants. Elders Yurex, Frank said, turning to the ancient alien who had become something of a mentor to him, I've been meaning to ask. How are you adjusting to your new role? It must be quite a change after serving on the council for so long. The elder's skin rippled in what Frank had come to recognize as a smile. Leading the Interspecies Biological Understanding Initiative is the most fulfilling work of my long life. For centuries, I prepared our people for war against a mythical enemy. Now, I prepare them for peace through understanding. As Earth became just another blue dot in the vast blackness of space, Frank thought about Bandit and the other raccoons back at his family's lake house. Such ordinary creatures to him, yet they had changed the course of galactic history. You know, Kira said, following his gaze, they're talking about making the raccoon Earth's official representative animal to the Confederation. There's even a movement to build a raccoon sanctuary on the Confederation's capital world. Frank laughed. From feared monster to diplomatic mascot, that's quite a promotion. The ship's engines hummed as they prepared for the jump to faster-than-light travel. Their first destination was a world called Nexus Prime, known for its extraordinary diversity of avian life forms. Representative Young, Jurek said formally, on behalf of the Confederation, I wish to extend our deepest gratitude once more. Your simple act of recognition, identifying what we thought was our greatest enemy as a common creature from your world, has transformed our civilization. Frank shook his head modestly. I just knew a raccoon when I saw one. And in doing so, you taught us the greatest lesson a civilization can learn, the elder replied. That fear of the unknown is often greater than the unknown itself. As the stars stretched into streaks of light around them, Frank thought about how a single moment in the council chamber had changed everything when an alien elder spoke of an ancient fear, and he had raised his hand and said, "That's my backyard animal." The universe, it seemed, was full of surprises, and understanding them was humanity's greatest adventure yet. 3 months into their mission, the team had cataloged wildlife on 7 different planets. Frank had seen creatures that defied imagination, floating jellyfish like beings that lived in the upper atmosphere of gas giants, crystalline arthropods that communicated through light patterns, and plants that could move faster than humans when threatened. They were currently orbiting Marison Roman 4, a world known for its massive inland seas and the complex aquatic ecosystems they contained. Frank stood on the shuttle launch deck, preparing to join the day's expedition to the largest sea, known locally as the Endless Blue, excited for today. Asked Kira, adjusting her environmental suit. Though Marison's atmosphere was breathable for humans, the expedition protocol required full protection when first investigating a new habitat. Definitely, Frank replied. Trizax says the sonar readings suggest organisms larger than Earth's blue whales. Jurex approached them, moving with more vigor than Frank had seen in the old alien before this mission began. The local scientists are particularly excited to show you the migration patterns of the deep-sea luminants. Apparently, they form patterns similar to your Earth constellations. As they boarded the shuttle, Frank reflected on how quickly the mission had evolved. What had begun as a scientific expedition had become a cultural phenomenon across the Confederation. Broadcasts of their discoveries were watched by trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. The raccoon revelation, as it was now universally known, had sparked an unprecedented interest in comparative biology. The shuttle descended through Marison's peach-colored clouds, revealing an endless expanse of deep purple water below. Unlike Earth's blue oceans, the higher copper content in Marison's seas gave them their distinctive hue. Approaching landing zone, announced the pilot, a four-armed Quantian whose species was particularly skilled at multitasking. Local science team is already on site. They touched down on a floating research platform where a group of Marisonians waited. The natives were amphibious humanoids with webbed hands and feet, their skin a mottled pattern of greens and purples that helped them blend into their aquatic environment. "Welcome to the Endless Blue," greeted the lead scientist, whose translator rendered her name as Shala. "We have prepared diving equipment modified for your physiologies." The next few hours were spent preparing for the dive. Though the Marisonians could breathe underwater naturally, the visitors required specialized equipment. Frank's diving suit was more advanced than anything available on Earth, a skin-tight material that extracted oxygen directly from the water while maintaining his body temperature and pressure. "Remember," Shala instructed as they prepared to enter the water, "the luminants are not dangerous, but they are sensitive to electrical fields. Your suits are shielded, but try to maintain a distance of at least 10 body lengths." Frank nodded, then followed the Marisonian scientists into the purple waters. The sensation was unlike any diving he'd experienced on Earth. The suit allowed him to breathe normally while a field around his head kept water away from his face, creating the illusion that he was simply walking through an alien environment rather than swimming. As they descended deeper, the water darkened to a rich indigo. Frank activated his suit's bioluminescence detectors, and suddenly the darkness came alive with points of light, thousands of small organisms drifting in the currents, each producing its own unique pattern of illumination. "This is incredible," Kira's voice came through his communication system. "The biodiversity here makes Earth's oceans look simple by comparison." Shala led them deeper, where the scattered points of light gave way to larger patterns. "We are approaching the luminant migration route," she explained. "They should be passing through this sector within the next few minutes." They positioned themselves in a viewing area, a natural formation of rock that created an amphitheater-like space in the underwater landscape. The scientists activated recording equipment while Jurex floated nearby, his ancient eyes wide with wonder. "I have lived for 3 centuries, the elder said softly, "and yet in these past months I feel I am seeing the universe for the first time." A low, melodic hum began to fill the water around them, not quite sound as humans understood it, but a vibration that Frank could feel through his entire body. The hum grew stronger, and then they appeared. The luminants were massive creatures, each at least 100 meters long, with sinuous bodies that resembled a cross between Earth's whales and elongated manta rays. Their skin pulsed with complex patterns of bioluminescence, blues, greens, and purples flowing across their bodies in what appeared to be deliberate sequences. "They're communicating," Trizax observed, scanning the creatures. "Not just with each other, but creating a collective field of information. It's similar to a neural network, but distributed across multiple organisms." As the luminants passed overhead, their light displays synchronized, creating massive, shifting constellations against the dark water. Frank recognized patterns that seemed strangely familiar, geometric shapes that appeared in the mathematics of multiple species, spirals that resembled galaxy formations, and sequences that pulsed with almost musical rhythm. "They're not just animals," Shala explained, her voice filled with pride. "They're living archives. Each pattern they display contains information, the history of our world, astronomical observations, even abstract concepts. My people learned to decode their patterns thousands of years ago, which gave us our first understanding of mathematics and science." Frank watched in awe as the migration continued, dozens, then hundreds of the massive creatures passing overhead in perfect coordination, their light displays growing more complex and beautiful with each passing moment. "This changes everything," Jurex said quietly. "Again." Frank turned to the elder. "What do you mean?" For millennia, the Confederation has classified species as either sentient or non-sentient, with clear legal and ethical distinctions between the two categories, Jurex explained. "But these luminants, they're neither and both. They possess collective intelligence without individual sapience. They communicate complex information without language as we understand it. Kira nodded in understanding. Like Earth's coral reefs or forest mycelium networks, but far more advanced. Precisely, Jurex agreed. And like your raccoons, they challenge our fundamental assumptions about consciousness and intelligence. The expedition continued for another hour, with the scientists collecting data while Frank simply absorbed the experience. When they finally returned to the surface, he felt changed in ways he couldn't articulate. That evening, as the team gathered in the ship's common area to review their findings, the conversation turned philosophical. "I've been thinking," Frank said, "about what would have happened if I hadn't recognized that hologram as a raccoon that day in the council chamber." Trizax's antennae twitched thoughtfully. The quarantine protocols would have been implemented. Earth would have been isolated from the Confederation for at least a standard century while we conducted remote observations for signs of the Voidwraith. "And if you had determined these signs existed?" Kira asked. The insectoid scientist didn't answer immediately. Finally, Jurex spoke. "The sterilization protocols were never a bluff. The fear of the Voidwraith was so ingrained in our civilization that we would have destroyed an inhabited world rather than risk its spread." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "But that's not what happened," Frank said finally. "Instead, we're here, learning from each other, exploring together." Jurex nodded slowly. "From fear to understanding, from isolation to connection, this is the true legacy of the raccoon revelation." As their mission continued, the team encountered more wonders and more challenges to their preconceptions. On the desert world of Carax, they discovered what appeared to be simple rock formations that were actually colonial organisms with lifespans measured in millennia. In the dense jungles of Terrorless Prime, they documented flying creatures that spent their entire lives airborne, never touching solid ground. Each discovery was broadcast back to both Earth and the Confederation, inspiring a new generation of xenobiologists and fundamentally changing how different species viewed their place in the cosmos. 1 year into the mission, they received an urgent communication from the Confederation Council. A new amendment to the Sentient Rights Charter had been proposed, one that would create a spectrum of intelligence categories rather than a binary classification, with corresponding protections for each level. The Marisonian luminants would be classified as collective intelligences, Trizax explained as they reviewed the proposal. While Earth's great apes, cetaceans, and certain birds would fall under limited individual sentience. Even your raccoons would receive a classification adaptive problem solvers with protections against exploitation or cruelty. Frank felt a surge of pride not just for Earth's animals, but for the Confederation's willingness to evolve its thinking. This is a huge step forward. "It is the beginning of a new era," Jurex agreed. "One where we seek to understand rather than categorize, to connect rather than separate." As the mission entered its final months, Frank found himself reflecting on how far they had come. The team had documented life on 27 worlds, contributed to a fundamental restructuring of the Confederation's approach to biology, and built bridges between species that had previously viewed each other with suspicion or indifference. Their final destination was Primordium, a world believed to be one of the oldest sites of evolutionary development in the known galaxy. As their ship entered orbit, sensors detected something unexpected: energy signatures similar to those once attributed to the mythical Voidwraith. "It's probably another misunderstanding," Frank suggested as they analyzed the data. "Maybe Primordium has its own version of raccoons." Jurex studied the readings with careful attention. Perhaps there is some truth at the core of the Voidwraith legend after all. Not a world-destroying monster, but something our ancestors encountered and misinterpreted. The expedition to Primordium's surface was approached with scientific curiosity rather than fear. What they discovered was neither monster nor mundane animal, but something in between: a species of semi-transparent creatures that existed partially in a different dimension, appearing and disappearing as they moved between realities. "Fascinating," Trizax declared after hours of observation. They share certain neural structures with Earth's raccoons, the same structures that allow for enhanced spatial awareness. But in these creatures, that ability has evolved to the point where they can actually transition between dimensional states. Frank watched as one of the creatures roughly the size of a large dog examined their equipment with curious appendages before seemingly melting into the air, only to reappear several meters away. So the Voidwraith legend wasn't entirely wrong, he observed. Your ancestors did encounter beings with abilities that would have seemed supernatural. They just exaggerated the threat over time. Jurex nodded slowly. Fear tends to grow in the telling. A creature that can walk between dimensions becomes a monster that can devour stars. A clever problem solver becomes a world-ending threat. As they completed their final expedition and prepared for the journey home, Frank found himself standing once more on the observation deck, Earth now growing larger in the view screen as they approached. "What will you do when we return?" Kira asked, joining him at the window. Frank smiled. "First, I'm going to visit my family's lake house and thank Bandit personally for changing the course of galactic history. After that," he shrugged. "The Confederation has asked me to lead a new initiative helping other worlds develop wildlife conservation programs based on Earth's models." "A worthy endeavor," said Jurex, who had approached silently, "and I have news that may interest you both. The Council has unanimously approved the new Sentient Rights Charter, with all 57 categories of intelligence recognized and protected." Frank extended his hand to the elder in the human gesture of congratulations, which Jurex had learned to reciprocate. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't been willing to question your own beliefs, Elder. That took more courage than facing any monster." The old alien's skin flushed with emotion. "And none of it would have happened if a human hadn't raised his hand in a council chamber and said, 'That's my backyard animal.' Sometimes, Representative Young, the simplest truths are the most powerful." As Earth filled the view screen, Frank thought about how a chance encounter between species had changed the course of history twice. First, when the Confederation's ancestors misinterpreted raccoons as monsters, and again, when he had recognized that monster as simply a clever animal from his backyard. Understanding, it seemed, was the greatest tool for peace that any species could possess. And in that understanding lay the promise of a future where different worlds and different beings could learn from each other, grow together, and explore the wonders of a universe far more complex and beautiful than any of them had imagined alone. When the Curiosity finally docked at Earth's orbital station, Frank was surprised to find a welcoming committee that included not just diplomatic officials, but a group of schoolchildren holding stuffed raccoon toys and drawings. A new chapter had begun not just for humanity or the Confederation, but for all the countless species that shared the galaxy with them, sentient and non-sentient alike. And somewhere in the woods of Minnesota, oblivious to his role in galactic politics, Bandit the raccoon continued to raid trash cans, solve puzzles, and live his life a simple creature who had inadvertently saved a planet and transformed a civilization, simply by being exactly what he was.